Well, good day everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Before we get started, I just want to review a few technical items. At the bottom of your Zoom viewing screen, you will see audio settings and Q&A. If you've logged in via computer, please click on audio settings to ensure your preferred audio device is selected so you can listen to today's session. There will be a Q&A portion at the end of today's presentation. Throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function to input any questions you may have. We will address as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion. A couple things to note: all participant audio is set to listen only, and this event is being recorded. And without further delay, I'll be passing things over to Christine.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to everyone who's here joining us for today's Innovation at Work webinar. I'm really excited to have with us Paul McDonagh-Smith, who's going to talk to us about digital learning strategy, teaching and learning in the digital age. Thank you everyone for being with us today, and thank you, Paul. So a little bit about Paul McDonagh-Smith. He leads the MIT Sloan Executive Education's digital teaching and learning programs, building and implementing digital business strategy and undertaking digital experiments to identify and then engineer next generation digital learning products, services, and strategies. He's a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan, who is faculty director on the in-person program titled Digital Learning Strategy and the online program titled Algorithmic Business Thinking, Hacking Code to Create Value. So let me talk to you a little bit about what we will cover in today's webinar. We'll talk a little bit about the evolving role of technology in our lives and work. We'll talk about how we can harness technology to build a digital learning strategy. Then how we can apply digital learning to improve our lives, our organizations, and our communities. So without further ado, I'm happy to hand things over to Paul, who will be sharing these insights further. Paul?
Well, thank you, Christine, and just like to take a little moment to welcome everybody to today's session. I'm very pleased that you were able to join, and of course, at this time, hope you and your families are very well. Let's get straight into this then. Let's actually go on a little bit of a journey. Let's start going on a little bit of a journey, and the first stop on our journey is to go to Ghana, as you can see in the map here, where we have a problem that needs to be fixed. Like many West African nations, Ghana has reasonably well-developed cities, a thriving tourist industry, impressive agriculture, and a well-developed mining sector, as well as a reasonably stable government. Other than a few large cities, however, the demographics of the country are challenging. Most people live in small, subsistence-level villages, roads disappear quickly, and services such as healthcare and education are difficult to access in the remote regions of the country. As a result, a significant proportion of the population, nearly 30%, suffers from illiteracy. In a country where nearly 30% of the population is also younger than 15, this is a potentially paralyzing fact of life. To put this into perspective, a 30% illiteracy rate in the US would occur if the residents of the entire western region of the country, 109 million people, were unable to read. Those of us who were taught to read as young children rarely give much thought to the question of what life would be like without it. But let's just consider this reality for just a moment. A person who is unable to read can't sign their name, and even if they can, they don't know what they are signing. And in most countries, a signature on an official document constitutes a legally binding contract. They can't read a job application, they can't read the label or instructions on a bottle of medication, they can't help their children with schoolwork. In essence, the only mechanism they have for the absorption of life-changing information is either word of mouth or personal experience, both somewhat dubious sources of first-hand insight, knowledge, and problem-solving skills required for a citizen to function in society. This is where Toaston enters into the equation. Amongst other goals, the elimination of illiteracy in the developing world is important to the team at Toaston. But building schools isn't completely straightforward in a country like Ghana, where the population is broadly and thinly scattered across what can be quite a vast and challenging landscape. Instead, Toston turned to a simple but profoundly effective technology solution, the mobile phone. In the developing world, notably in Africa, for example, most people who live outside cities may have limited access to running water, electricity, natural gas, and often not much in the way of wired communications. But almost everybody appears to have a mobile device. So Toston took advantage of this. They built a mobile app and made it available to everyone in the country, free of charge. They blanketed the region with voice messaging, designed to spread the word about its availability and to encourage high download levels. Why? Because the app that they developed is designed to take a person who is functionally illiterate and in approximately 7 or 8 weeks, progress them to a functional reading level. No classroom, no teachers, just a handful of mobile technology and a willingness to learn. And the results? Very impressive. This is a powerful example of digital learning. When applied to real human problems, the challenges that impede us individually and collectively can be converted to opportunities to improve how we live and work. Digital learning, the practice of achieving learning outcomes through the focused use of technology, is the essence of our conversation here today. But we don't need to go as far as Ghana to find useful examples of digital learning. In fact, here at MIT Sloan, as I'm sure is the case in a number of your organizations as well, we've been experimenting our way forward with digital learning over the last 10 years, conducting experiments to understand the role technology can and should play in our online and in-person teaching and learning experiences. Back in 2012, when Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast of the United States, we had a problem. We had set up a new program, an exciting new program on big data, and the team in charge of the program had to come up with a quick solution that would allow people who couldn't travel to Cambridge to attend the program. So what began as an improvised online simulcast to mimic a classroom experience evolved into a product we titled 4DX, an avatar virtual world experience. Again, as with Toston, this is an example of using digital learning to fix a real and at the time current problem. At MIT Sloan, we recognize that technology is fundamentally a human enabler. We also see that at its best, it's not satisfied just with aiming to replicate our physical or mental capabilities, but to exceed them, to allow us to travel further, reach higher, and actually achieve more of our individual and collective potential. It was in this spirit that back in 2016, we actually launched our telepresence robotics mobility project. The inaugural participant on this program, Tom Hershey, actually provided us with this quote here. You can see that the robot is an opportunity, not a substitution. Tom's point about the robot representing an opportunity rather than just being a substitute for a physical experience is a powerful one, I think, for us to keep in mind as we look to build and implement our own digital learning strategies and solutions. Digital learning itself doesn't need to reflect the learning objectives, user experiences, or even the business models of the physical world it was born within. So if you just take a look here for a moment at this particular slide, just want to give you a sense of what we're actually trying to achieve with the robotics mobility program. What we actually looked to do was allow those participants that weren't able to get to Cambridge to be able to attend various open enrollment programs that we were running at the time. And after we ran that first pilot program with Tom Hershey, you saw his quote just a moment ago, we actually spread this out to cover a number of other programs and other participants. And a couple of the quotes here just actually tried to give you a sense of the experience and the feedback from those participants. What was very important to us was that we weren't simply enabling the remote experience or just the digital experience, but also very mindful of the way in which the robot and the person behind it were actually interfacing and impacting the in-person experience as well. So really just trying to hammer home this point that when we actually build our digital learning solutions and strategies, we need to be mindful of the physical world in which they will often be relayed and implemented as well. Now, just moving on to introduce here the periodic table of digital technology elements. When we think about building the teams, organizations, cities, and societies of tomorrow, we invariably look to technology to lend us a hand. In fact, our visions of tomorrow are often shaped by the innovations delivered by algorithms running in code on our computers, laptops, and smartphones. To create and enroll our teams on the visions we build, we need to lead and manage with an appreciation of the principles and the possibilities of the digital technologies we have at our disposal. With this in mind, let's talk for a couple of minutes about this concept of the periodic table of digital elements. Back in 1869, when Mendeleev published his first version of the periodic table, he referred to it as an attempt towards a chemical conception of the ether. In a sense, what we're trying to do with this version is an attempt to provide a way of ordering our business thinking about the various families of transformative technologies that have the potential to disrupt our business today. As with the chemical elements, a number of the digital technology elements can combine to form more complex, valuable molecules. Where sodium and chlorine combine to form table salt, AI and robotics might actually combine to create products like the telepresence robots we saw a moment ago. Now, we haven't really got too much time here to go into all of the details of these various elements, but I would like to just give you a little sense of how this is actually constructed. So on the left-hand side here, we have the period or family of AI. As we move across the table, we encounter the periods of security, robotics, crypto, computation, unified communications, mobility, IoT, various realities, mixed, augmented, and virtual. And then finally, taking up the position usually reserved for the noble gases, we see the period of analytics, where the elements enable us to create practical, useful bonds with the data we're collecting as a result of our application of these digital technologies. One thing we haven't spoken about here is the human elements or the human period of the periodic table. As our human and machine relationship is recalibrated in today's digital economy, we can expect, as Mendeleev recognized in his elegant design, new elements to be unearthed and added to our table. A number of these elements will reflect our new partnership with digital technologies. We might expect, for example, elements of empathy, collaboration, communication, digital culture and language, digital supersenses, and perhaps even algorithmic business thinking to form a further period on our table. And in doing so, actually lay out some of the foundations of tomorrow's organizations. Now that we've introduced the idea of a periodic table of elements, of digital elements, perhaps we should reflect for a moment and think a little bit about how we actually got to where we are today. Two concepts, I think, are particularly useful for understanding where we are today and how indeed we got here. The relationship between these two concepts was explained to me by Erik Brynjolfsson on a recent program that we worked upon. The first, and perhaps better known, is Moore's law, which is an expansion of an observation made by Gordon Moore, co-founder of microprocessor maker Intel, in a 1965 article in Electronics magazine. Moore noted that the number of transistors in a minimum cost integrated circuit had been doubling every 12 months, and predicted that this same rate of improvement would continue into the future. When this proved to be the case, Moore's law was born. Variations of Moore's law have been applied to improvement over time in disk drive capacity, display resolution, and network bandwidth. And I think it's fair to say it's very common knowledge and a common model that we have within our business world. The second concept relevant for understanding recent computing advances is closely related to Moore's law. It comes from an ancient story about mathematics made relevant to the present age by the innovator and futurist Ray Kurzweil, and as I mentioned, shared recently with me by Eric. In one version of this story, the inventor of the game of chess shows his creation to the country's ruler. The emperor is so delighted by the game that he allows the inventor to name his own reward. The clever man asks for a quantity of rice to be determined as follows. 1 grain of rice is placed on the first square of the chessboard, 2 grains on the second, 4 on the third, and so on, with each square receiving twice as many grains as the previous one. The emperor agrees, thinking that this reward was way too small. He eventually sees, however, that the constant doubling results in tremendously large numbers. The inventor winds up with a pile of rice bigger than Mount Everest. In some versions of the story, the emperor is so displeased at being outsmarted that he beheads the inventor. Perhaps a cautionary note for anyone thinking about being a bit of a smart aleck in that type of way. In his 2000 book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, When Computers Exceed Human Intelligence, Kurzweil notes that the pile of rice is not that exceptional on the first half of the chessboard. After 32 squares, the emperor had given the inventor about 4 billion grains of rice. That sounds like a big number, but in fact actually equates to about 1 large field's worth of rice. After that point, the emperor did begin to kind of take notice of what was going on here, but the emperor could still remain an emperor, and importantly, the inventor, in this case the inventor of the game of chess, could still retain his head. However, it was as they moved into the second half of the chessboard that at least one of the two of them was likely to get into some trouble. So for over 50 years now, the number of transistors you can put on a chip has been doubling about every 18 to 24 months. And that means the power of computing that you can get for $1 has been dropping by 50% year in and year out. Going back to chemistry terminology for a moment, catalyst might be a good word to describe Moore's law. In fact, I'd even go as far as saying it's perhaps one of the most important things that's been happening in the global economy over the last half a century or so. But it brings up a very interesting point. Moore's law has been going on for more than half a century, but we're only just really over the most recent period starting to see science fiction-like technologies. We have computers beating chess champions, Go champions, poker champions, as well as a number of really impressive technologies such as self-driving cars, etc., etc. Now, Eric and Andy McAfee, who collaborated, co-authored, in fact, with Eric, the 3 books that he's written, actually shared with me that they had put together a small calculation. They looked up to understand when the United States government started tracking this new thing called information technology as a category that a business could invest in. It appears that 1958 was the first time we saw the words information technology referenced in the national statistics. Taking that as a starting date, let's use a year and a half as the doubling period to have a sense of when we entered the second half of the chessboard with the business use of digital technologies. If you do that calculation, it turns out that we entered the second half of the chessboard in about 2006, 2007. Now, Eric and Andy stress that this is somewhat of a back of an envelope type of calculation, and on one hand, we shouldn't read too much into it. That said, on the other hand, it perhaps helps us understand the smartphone era, the self-driving cars, drones, AI, computer go kind of deep mind enabled type of technologies, all of which have appeared since 2006. So what I'm trying to get at here is that perhaps these technologies might be second half of the chessboard technologies. This might just be no more than a directional type of observation, but perhaps it's useful in the sense that why are we actually seeing what we're seeing today? Yes, we've had millions and even billions of transistors on a chip, but now we're getting to astronomical numbers, and we're getting beyond what most of us are used to comprehending. Put simply, it's not just a few fields worth of rice. It's not numbers that we're used to dealing with, and we're getting powers in computers that just weren't seen there before. Kurzweil's point is that constant doubling, reflecting exponential growth, is very deceptive because it's initially unremarkable. Exponential increases initially look a lot like standard linear ones, but of course they're not. Couple that observation with Eric and Andy's calculation, and we might reasonably conclude that we are indeed in the early stages of the second half of the chessboard. If that's the case, I think we haven't seen anything yet and should look to maybe fasten our metaphorical seatbelts for quite a ride in the months and years ahead. So, we've taken a little bit of time to speak about where we are today and how indeed we got here. But what does that mean for how we teach and learn in the digital age? In answer to that question, let's start by looking at the characteristics and principles of the digital networks that connect us as individuals. Not just as individuals, but in fact as organizations and communities. From there, we can look at the elements that arise from these digital networks and form the basis of how we might consider teaching and learning in the digital age. Networks are a fundamental pattern of life. Wherever we see life, we see networks. Networks create the shapes and structures of our societies. For example, in agrarian society, networks were predominantly local, orbiting often around a local radius of workplace, places of worship, and family homes, often within a 10-kilometer or so type of radius. In the industrial society, the gravitational pull of cities resulted in individuals and often entire families relocating within the same or different countries. Networks in industrial societies were more geographically dispersed. Henry Ford's production line philosophy, in fact, didn't just deliver affordable cars, but influenced a one-size-fits-all approach to manufacturing, media, and also education that we might suggest is today being overturned in the digital economy. Henry Ford's comment that people can have the Model T in any color so long as it's black seems very outdated today in a world where we're moving from mass production to mass personalization. And from mass communication, we might suggest we're actually on our way to mass collaboration. Our world, the one you and we all live and work within, isn't flat nor round. It, in fact, shapeshifts dynamically based on the networks we activate to share and receive information and experiences. In lots of ways, we're both local and global. We're, in fact, our own media as we spread our lives across computer networks that are governed by a different set of physics than that we're used to in the carbon world, and that which actually formed the industrial society that we lived within. Distance has a new relationship today with time, and our relationships with ourselves, with each other, and indeed our planet is being redefined. Today, the activities that shape and sculpt human life are largely organized in global digital networks. Banking, production, mass media, entertainment, education, social communications. The nodes of our digital age are in fact transforming the institutions and organizations of industrial society into a global network that allows for the flow of information, experience, and identity inside and outside of our national and organizational borders. Against this backdrop, in the same way that previous industrial revolutions changed our education systems, I'd like to argue that we need to change the way we teach and learn to fit how we live and work in the digital age. Much is made of today's speed of change. To be frank, I'm perhaps not that well positioned to truly know if today's rate of change is markedly different from that experienced by other generations. In economics, for example, the curve of growth over the last 100 years or so, as far as it can be traced, seems to be at least pretty smooth and doesn't really support claims of explosive change. But perhaps that's not really the point here. Maybe the story we talked about earlier around technology entering the second half of the chessboard is useful here as well. Early on in the technology chessboard, humans felt that our designs and possibilities were perhaps governed or controlled by the elements of the physical world, earth, air, wind, and fire, which we were told were the fundamental elements of our existence. There was an idea that these elements had a will, and that will couldn't easily be bent to our own human designs and intentions. As we've moved through the squares of the technology chessboard, perhaps we're breaking free from this reality. For most of history, we thought and acted upon our physical realities. New physical realities were in fact a result of inventions or technology. Every invention, from the wheel onward perhaps, has created new possibilities that didn't exist before. Earlier in our history, inventions were fewer and farther between. They were departures from the norm. It might be argued that this infrequency gave us the time, or at least the perception of it, to make the required adjustments more slowly and perhaps even unconsciously. The Industrial Revolution was just that. It was a revolution. It was revolutionary because it ran into a worldview that wasn't ready for it. Today, we don't see invention or technology as an accidental type of thing. In fact, we actively and deliberately plan for it. We foster and nurture it as a natural production line to new practices. My point here is that we may be far enough along the chessboard to suggest that technology is coming or has come of age. The technology elements we have in our periodic table can be harnessed by us to create new possibilities. What's important for us is to have the desire and the creativity to do so. These new possibilities lead to more choices, which in turn lead to more opportunities. And I think this is what might be causing our sense of being overwhelmed by technology and thinking that speed of change has increased. Whatever has created all of this, the reality for our teams and organizations is that we need to mind the gaps created in our workforce and business strategies. In order to move from possibilities to opportunities, to choices, to action, we need new skills in new people and new places, in newly accelerated timeframes. This is where, in my opinion, digital learning and the toolkit it provides becomes an essential requirement for our organizations. The ways in which we taught and learned in the agrarian and industrial ages simply won't work for us today in the digital economy. We need an education system that sits at the same pH level as the world around it. Bottom line is that digital learning provides you with this capability. How effectively you teach and learn will determine how effectively we convert the challenges posed by technology into opportunities for growth in our organizations. Just like the refrain on the London Underground, when stepping into the digital economy, you'll need to mind the gap. The gap is between the industrial and digital economy, between how your teams and organizations need to think about work, tasks, and jobs, how you need to lead and manage yourself and your teams, and the strategies you need to build and implement to bridge the industrial past with the digital present. You'll also need to mind the gap between your business and your customers' expectations. Additionally, we need to mind the gap between how we're thinking and acting at different levels of our organization. The closer the alignment between our board, CXO teams, management, employees, and customers, the more effective we'll be at bridging our businesses into the digital economy. So I'd just like to talk to you for a couple of minutes around this concept of reverse engineering. So if we accept that in order to take advantage of the opportunities of the digital age, we need to upgrade and change how we teach and learn, how should we go about approaching this change? I'd like to introduce an approach called reverse engineering the future, borrowed from a friend of mine, Steve Shepherd. I've used this process with a number of leading organizations over the years and found it particularly useful when looking to chart organizational paths in uncertain times. Alan Kay, an early Silicon Valley influencer who, amongst many other things, helped create what became the laptop computer and the GUI, made the following observation: the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Instead of beginning in the present and marching forward, these organizations who use reverse engineering start in the future by creating and crafting the vision they want to achieve. Then they march backwards, identifying and looking to eliminate all of the obstacles that would otherwise impede their ability to reach and realize that future state. However, unlike traditional scenario planning, which very often begin at time zero and extrapolate into some indeterminate future, as shown in the slide here, this technique is based on the belief that attempts to reach the desired future by extrapolating from the present often result in a quicksand effect that mires our planners in the certainties of the past and the unyielding roots of the present. Therefore, it's critical that planners pick a point in the future that's far enough out that it becomes possible to let go of the present and past and make assumptions that are free from their grip. The goal of the reverse engineered future is to achieve a vision that everyone holds in high esteem and which all agree will move the organization forward in the best possible way. As you can see here from the slide, the process has 5 components: an achievable vision, a set of powerful organizational values, a desired mission and completion date, a strategy, and an action plan that facilitates reaching these objectives. Each of these components is different, yet related in lots of ways to the others. In the 2-day program that Christine mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, we go into more details, but I think it might be useful to just share a tiny kind of introduction here. The vision is the statement of the desired end state. That vision can be as far-reaching and dramatic as participants wish it to be, but it has to be achievable. I'd just like to focus for a moment on values, because values are perhaps the most critical and often underrated component in this process. They define how your organization wants to be viewed by its customers, peers, and competitors. These values often come from the heart as much as the head and define how the corporation and the business might behave in the community, regardless of whether that community is a small town or the entire world. Now, most organizations have mission statements. While the vision makes us passionate about life, the mission makes us passionate about our jobs. Now, when it comes to the strategy, just to share a couple of brief points here, the strategy contains or will contain a clear description of how the mission will be achieved. Your strategy can have various stages, but each has to build on the next, and each must have clear goals associated with it. Once your strategy has been formulated, you can build an action plan developed with all the teams and all of the individuals who are going to be responsible for the delivery of this. The action plan, of course, will need to be managed closely and provides a blueprint for delivering key elements of your vision. So now that we've spoken about where the future might sit and how we might get there. Now that your team and organization have a plan for reverse engineering its future, how can we build the digital learning strategy that's going to help get you there safely and in one piece? Every team and organization's future and present are different. So it's not going to work to have a standard one-size-fits-all digital learning strategy. We're going to need personalized digital learning strategies that fit each company's unique realities. Here at MIT Sloan, as an output from the digital teaching and learning experiments we've conducted, we've developed a practical 4D model to help organizations build digital learning strategies that help them get to their desired future states. This 4D model is built on 4 elements: discovery, design, delivery, and data. Now, we consider these to be the foundations of a successful digital learning strategy for your team and organization. This model allows us to craft a deliberately chosen track of forward movement as we develop a digital learning business strategy, and a life cycle that realistically ensures it's going to be effective and efficient over the course of its lifetime. As we've said, a one-size-fits-all approach to digital learning simply doesn't work for most situations. It must be customized to meet the immediate unique needs of your context. The 4D model provides a structured approach that personalizes the digital learning strategy for each organization. The discovery phase captures required stakeholder outcomes, unique learner profiles, required or desirable exit level outcomes, learning objectives, learner experience parameters, as well as completion criteria, evaluation criteria, and reporting and analytics requirements. The design phase relies on a design taxonomy that includes clearly defined asset, unit, module, program, and project level outcomes. Also covered in this section is a framework for capturing the content that will be covered in each learning asset, where activities will be conducted, what complementary materials are available, and what level of coaching may or may not be required to ensure compliance with the desired competencies and learning outcomes. The delivery phase, which is all about implementation, kicks off long before the program actually goes live on your selected learning platform or in your classroom. You and your teams will have sculpted and crafted your digital programs based on the capabilities of your platform and people, as well as the expectations and preferences of your target audiences and learners. Just because a learning experience is delivered in a digital or online format, however, doesn't mean that it needs to be cold, impersonal, or even low in emotional quotient. Our ambition must be quite the opposite. We need to find ways to bridge the emotion, energy, and engagement of the best physical world experiences into our digital domains. We need to be able to put a supporting arm around their shoulders, the participants' shoulders, when the learning is difficult, and pat them on the back when they've done well. We talk a lot about hardware and software, but when it comes to digital learning, perhaps we need to engage in a bit of hardware as well to connect participants to their content in an intrinsically motivating manner. In the data phase, the program and the participant data is all pulled together from the discovery phase all the way through design and delivery. Data analytics, in fact, are the engine of our digital learning. They inform the continuous improvement, and they allow us to kind of operate they allow us to operate almost as a compass and a GPS in digital learning. They show us both the direction in which we need to steer our programs and exactly where we are on our journey. The data doesn't just inform our digital learning decisions. It in fact also provides us with an opportunity to connect our two worlds of learning, digital and physical. The data we collect in our digital learning activities often provides useful insights that can improve how we approach learning and teaching in our physical classrooms as well. Now, just to move on, just to share with you this idea of double helix learning. The reason we've come up with this is in answer to how we can apply digital learning such that it can help improve lives, organizations, cities, and societies in general. I think it's useful for us to begin by exploring the relationship between digital and physical learning. I'm of the opinion that there's a lot of value to actually combining these two delivery mechanisms. And often I found myself thinking of them as a double helix. Double helix learning is based on the concept that a well-designed digital learning strategy creates a highly functional link to the physical world. In the same way, you can see here in the graphic, in the same way that the two upright sides of the DNA ladder molecule are connected via the unique base pair rungs, a well-designed digital learning strategy connects physical and digital learning modalities via interconnected pairs of organizational functionality, communication, collaboration, cooperation, and compromise. These four functions, much like the four bases found in DNA, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, provide uniqueness and strength that can hold the model together. As we think about double helix learning, I think when it comes to physical and digital, we're very well served to not think of them as separate entities, but as complementary mechanisms to deliver the learning solutions that we need. Depending on the context and learning objectives, content can be delivered via one or both of these mechanisms. Indeed, physical and digital content can be overlaid upon each other to support the learning process and the application of new knowledge. By employing this concept and the construct of double helix, I'm suggesting there's an inextricable link between physical and digital learning. I think there are methods we can use to efficiently and effectively convert physical learning into digital learning and vice versa. For example, by building comprehensive experience maps that detail all of the steps in a physical learning interaction, we can capture, in essence, the source code with which we can then rewrite those experiences and run them digitally. Conversely, by creating data maps that digitally detail how a participant completed learning objectives, the route they took, the pattern they took, we're able, in a sense, to capture the sequencing that can then be helpful when looking to achieve the same learning outcome in a physical classroom. The digital data may actually provide us with insights of what's actually happening in the learning experience that we can then redeploy in different contexts, including physical. In addition to adopting a double helix approach to learning, in order to effectively apply your digital learning strategy, you may need to reconsider, or we may need to reconsider, how we think about teams in our organizations. Building and embedding digital learning requires coordination of a number of different types of activities. Indeed, and I'm sure you've all seen this, oftentimes people building or deploying digital learning for the first time are quite surprised by how long it takes, how much work actually goes into it, and how many people are involved. What we find is that digital learning brings together a broad range of business functions and often requires working actively with groups outside of our normal reporting lines. Digital learning works best when we operate as a team of teams. I actually first encountered this term, team of teams, in General McChrystal's book of the same name. He poses the question in that book of what if you could combine the adaptability, agility, and cohesion of a small team with the power and resources of a large organization? It's a concept, or it was a concept, that kind of very readily fits the way that we think about digital learning, that it's a team sport, and that in order to be effective, it's very useful to have a broad range of skill sets and diversity. We can think of teams as actually including people from inside and outside our organizations. In adopting these teams of teams, you may actually find yourself very often collaborating with people who you would normally compete with for resources or results, perhaps internally or externally. It's interesting to see that on one level, operating as a team of teams, and particularly leading and managing teams of teams, at the beginning, it almost feels as if you are kind of ceding some of your power, that you are actually giving something away. The reality is, though, in a funny sense, by actually operating as a team of teams, moving from a command and control structure to a cultivate and collaborate type of structure, very often you find yourself actually getting a lot of power back. By loosening some of the control mechanisms, you can actually inspire greater collaboration and trust and results. Now, here at MIT Sloan, we're very used to experimentation, and we've always used experiments to help us create our next generation learning solutions and experiences. Each experiment that we've conducted, even when it doesn't necessarily provide the answers we expected, has been valuable, even if only to identify what next steps we shouldn't take sometimes. We've conducted literally dozens, if not hundreds, of digital learning experiments. And just on this slide here, you can see some of the key principles that sit behind our approach. I'll just go through a couple of these now, just to kind of share with you. Just to draw attention, for example, to the framing of problems. We find it's very, very useful to spend time defining very clearly the problem you're looking to fix before you get started. Now, this might sound like a very obvious kind of point, but in a number of situations where we have a lot of expertise, we might feel that we have a sense of where the future sits or where the solution sits. And so taking a step back to actually think about kind of what problem we're looking to resolve, we found it very, very useful. We tend to operate our experiments on shorter type of timeframes, ideally, not always possible, but ideally 6 to 12 weeks. In line with the idea of teams of teams, we look to build a diverse kind of group who will work on these things. And just to draw your attention to a couple of these final principles, creating teaching organizations. We're very, very aware of the benefits of actually sharing the results of experiments very openly and transparently, and using them as an opportunity for the broader team to learn. The last one that I want to bring your attention to is this concept of being a presentist rather than a technology futurist. Now, this might seem somewhat curious. This is a very important point for me and for the team, I believe, that we look to see what we can do today to make a difference. We're very keen to kind of look at how we can make small incremental steps forward that will kind of lead us to the big kind of developments further down the track. But this idea of actually acting today is core to the way that we work at MIT Sloan, and core to the way in which we've been able to move our own digital learning strategy forward. Now, I hope kind of the last 40 minutes or so has been useful for you. We've been on a bit of a journey in terms of having started in Ghana, then visited some robots and some avatars. We looked at different aspects of the periodic table, how we actually got to have these series of new technology elements at our disposal. We tried to give a sense of why it's important today to have a digital learning strategy as we transfer or transform from industrial to digital types of contexts. And we tried to introduce some aspects of our 4D model of how we actually go about personalizing our digital learning strategy. Now, as I said, very, very grateful for you all having attended today, and very grateful for you having taken the time to follow us on this journey. What I'd like to do now is perhaps pass back to Christine, and if anybody has any questions, we can use the remainder of the time to go through those. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Paul. Wow, thank you for such insightful thoughts. It was really interesting what you said about our world being neither flat nor round, but rather that it shape shifts. Clearly, digital learning is having a profound impact in all our lives, both inside and outside of the classroom. And I'm particularly looking forward to diving deeper into that 4D learning model that you touched upon in the actual digital learning strategy program. So now let's take some time to address some of the questions that have been coming through in the Q&A section. So to our participants today, remember, if you want to submit a question, you can do so in the Q&A window located at the bottom of your screen. So let's get right to this, Paul. One of the questions I see here that came through a little bit ago, are there particular lessons that you've learned with regards to building or implementing digital learning that you can share with the group today?
I think it's a great question, first of all, and one as my partner in crime on most of this, that I think you're well positioned to answer as well. I think just a couple of kind of initial thoughts. It's been hard. It's hard work. Yeah, that's a lesson learned. So you know, you have to be prepared for, particularly kind of to get things started and to move it forward. It's a lot of hard work. I think though the key thing, it's something that was on the list of experiment principles, but I didn't talk about it there, so I will now. Is around, it's not so much a technology question as it is a human and people question. What we found to be very, very useful is that you have to kind of think about this in human terms. You have to care about your people. You have to really want to make a difference. And it's that type of energy and that type of that type of ambition that really fuels the technical and technological capabilities. The technology, bits and bytes, zeros and ones, oftentimes kind of the human use of these things, whether it's our participants or our teachers or a faculty, that requires just as much, if not more, thought. So I think this idea about being human first and foremost is key.
Yeah, indeed, sure is. Let's see, I see another question here through the Q&A section. Is there any one technology group or family from that periodic table of elements that you shared that we should be paying particular attention to, one maybe more than the other?
I think it's difficult because all of us, again, a really good question, so thank you to whoever kind of put that one in. I think it's interesting. We all have our kind of personal favorites, I suppose. It's very easy, isn't it, kind of today to kind of lean towards kind of the AI family. I think the AR, VR, and mixed realities type of family or period are very interesting. I think also given the situation that we face globally today with COVID-19 and coronavirus, I think those technologies that actually facilitate flexibility in our workplaces or work patterns are going to be very interesting. So rather than, it's perhaps not a very, very clear answer, but rather than any one given family, I think it's going to be interesting to see the combinations or the molecular kind of solutions that come into play. So I think AI with mixed realities, with perhaps elements of robotics, I think we're going to get into a period where the lines get blurred and there's going to be a lot of technology molecules formed here.
Yeah, great point. So somebody else here wants to learn a little bit more on what you talked about with regards to experimentation, right? So you said experimentation is important and you've conducted a number of experiments at Sloan. So the question is, which one is most important and why? Is there one that's more important than another, and why may that be so?
I think the first thing to say, and again, thank you for that question, whoever asked it, is the truth of the matter is, yeah, you very kindly said that I've kind of experimented, but you know as well as I do that kind of everybody within the team, it's a real kind of culture, and maybe that in itself is a really important point. I think, and perhaps this says a little bit about our culture as well at MIT, that the ones that I kind of think most about are the ones that perhaps didn't go completely according to plan. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that kind of even when experiments kind of don't go completely according to plan, there's still a lot of learnings and very interesting things. I think those situations are the ones that kind of actually can often point you in new and exciting directions. The one I'd call reference to is something you and I worked on, in fact, Christine, around the use of avatars in synchronous 4DX experiences. Now, commercially, it perhaps wasn't kind of the greatest success. From a participant perspective and a faculty perspective, you know, somewhat diplomatically, I'll say it had its challenges at times. But I think we actually unearthed a series of kind of elements of next generation user experience. You know, what people were comfortable with, what they were prepared to do, how they wanted to react and work and teach and learn, that have been useful in other experiments. So what I would say is that kind of nobody should get downhearted when kind of experiments fail. Although I'm not sure that is even a failure. But I think when they don't go according to plan, it's a great opportunity to really hone in on why, and kind of very often you get some nuggets there around kind of signposts to the future.
Yeah, that was really an eye-opening experiment, wasn't it?
Do you remember? Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, let's take another question here. So someone here said, I like the idea of operating as a team of teams, but how does it actually work in practice, and how do you manage a team of teams to go in the direction that you want to?
I think it comes back to the kind of phrase that I borrowed from Tom Malone, in fact, around leadership, you know, around, and Tom Malone, kind of a colleague of ours here, of course, at MIT Sloan, around kind of moving from a command and control structure to a cultivate and collaborate kind of mode. Now, it can be a little bit uncomfortable at the beginning because you have to truly collaborate, and I don't mean that kind of low-level collaboration where you kind of go for coffees and lunch and kind of, you know, do the PR thing. I mean the real collaboration, which requires compromising, cooperating, even when some of your own interests might be kind of at risk. You have to see the bigger picture, and you have to kind of act with kindness and kind of goodwill to your team, who oftentimes will be outside of your reporting structure. So, you know, it doesn't have the same gravitational pull at times. So team of teams, I think the diversity and the idea that, you know, there's always a lot, perhaps, or always more smarter people outside of your org than there is inside it. I think it represents a really good opportunity, and to lead and manage in that mode, you have to be prepared to kind of give up some of your power, which ironically, paradoxically, you're likely to get back further downstream.
Yeah, great, thank you. So I've seen similar questions around this next one come up, and so I think this is very top of mind for a lot of folks joining today. You referenced Hurricane Sandy earlier in the presentation. How do you think digital learning can help with the current COVID-19 situation?
Wow, that's a good question, isn't it? And one, I think, one that all of us are kind of wrestling and kind of, you know, working upon, irrespective of kind of which industry or business we actually work within. So the first thing to say is, in no way, shape or form, kind of any of the comments that we make here meant to take advantage of kind of what is fundamentally a very, well, of course, a very challenging, and is likely to continue to be a challenging situation for the foreseeable future. At the same time, we have to kind of recognize that it represents an opportunity to run experiments that perhaps would have been tricky to do before. Okay, so there's a reality that kind of a number of us are going to be working remotely for a period. Our interactions are going to be kind of different, and so I think the lessons learned from previous experiments are that the things that I mentioned before. Think and act as a presentist. Let's not wait to see kind of what the reality is going to be tomorrow. Let's start kind of working on what we can see happening today. If you have got remote kind of teams, let's get cracking kind of with the technology kind of bridges and putting them in place. Something is very easy for me to say, kind of, Christine, taking insights from our own team, make sure that kind of you're using the technology to perhaps kind of build upon the physical elements of the relationships that you have with your work friends. You know, we had a situation with it being St. Patrick's Day yesterday where one of our colleagues invited us into her kitchen as a virtual dynamic team. So it's not just about the business part of this, it's about the friendships, the relationships, the dynamics. And whilst kind of very unfortunate the situation, it represents an opportunity for us to experiment in kind of in a certain manner, and we shouldn't let that go. But we shouldn't wait either. We should act right here and now.
Yeah, great. So I see we're at the top of the hour, and so I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for all your questions. I know we didn't get to all of them in this webinar, but we will be following up with a blog post to answer any of the outstanding ones that we didn't have time for that we didn't have time for today. So please be on the lookout for that. So we're really excited to bring you this new program on digital learning strategy. The inaugural session will be this summer on July 9th and 10th. And Paul also teaches in the algorithmic business thinking, hacking the code to create value, which will run in the fall. So thank you, Paul, for all of your insights today. And thank you to everyone who joined us. We really hope to see you at a future program at MIT Sloan.
Thank you. I'd just like to echo that sentiment, and thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today. We're very pleased to spend time with you. Hopefully see you in person in the near future.